So we'll get our visual set up here. We have one of them working at least, no problem. The other one seems to be disconnected. So do please get in touch with us. 089 467 2000 is the text and WhatsApp number here if you want to get in touch with us. Thanks for that indeed. Thanks, Nuria. Well done. And young Pablo's in here assisting Abel. He's our new technical assistant, starting very young. And he's very welcome too. So thanks, Nuria. So 089 467 2000. We do love to hear from you. You want to text and WhatsApp us here, do please give us a call on 014 123456. We'd be delighted to get your phone calls as well. And if you want to email us, of course, info@radiomaria.ie is the email address. And drop us a line on St. Anthony's Business Park, Ballymount Road, Dublin 22, and there's a postcode there, D22 or 7W2. So we always like to hear from you here on Radio Maria, as you know, and it's all part of the conversation and the Chatechesis here as well. Now I see the Vatican News is buzzing there today, as indeed World Family of Radio Maria, asking us to lift up our hearts in prayer and participate in the appeal of Pope Francis in looking to bring peace really to the Ukraine and Russia. I've met the priest directors both of Radio Maria in Russia and in the Ukraine as well, and Father Samsonov I remember well, lovely man he is. I think he's on the World Family. They have a kind of a committee overseeing all the radios, and he's part of that international committee as well, Father Samsonov. But deeply upsetting to hear there's shelling and bombing and there's death and destruction going on. And Russia is just such a colossal force. None of it makes any sense. Why is this? Anyway, so I'll share with you just in the message we've received. May the Queen. The Pope is praying out. He wants the 2nd of March to be a day of prayer and fasting for peace. So is that the first Friday? No, that'll be next Wednesday, is that right? May the Queen of Peace preserve the world from the madness of war. This is the Pope's heartfelt invocation at the end of the general audience. This was yesterday's general audience, in which he calls believers to dedicate the first day of Lent to recollection for this European country, for the Ukraine and for Russia. That's next Wednesday, isn't it? Yeah. So my head is a little bit out of joint. God is the Father of us all, and not just of some. He wants us to be brothers and sisters and not enemies. I have great sorrow in my heart for the worsening of the situation in the Ukraine. And Pope Francis says at the end of the Chatechesis, shortly before the greetings that normally come at the end. Despite the diplomatic efforts of the last few weeks, he observes increasingly alarming scenarios are opening up. And like me, many people of the world experience anguish and concern. And once again, the peace of everyone is threatened by vested interests. So the Pope urges those who have political responsibilities to examine their consciences with seriousness before God, who is the God of peace and not of war, the Father of all, not just of some, who wants us to be brothers and not enemies. I ask all parties involved to refrain from any action that may cause even more suffering to the populations, destabilizing coexistence between nations and discrediting international law. So it's a very, very serious situation and deeply upsetting for us all. Pope Francis knows that politics is not enough to change hearts, that only God in the end can do that, and he therefore urges everyone, believers and non-believers, to join in a unanimous plea for peace. Jesus taught us, the Pope says, that to the evil senselessness of violence we should answer with the weapons of God, prayer and fasting. So wishing to mark Ash Wednesday as a day of fasting for peace. I especially encourage believers to devote themselves intensely to prayer and fasting on that day. May the Queen of Peace preserve the world from the madness of war. and this is today now. This is Aidan's downloaded this for me now from the Vatican News website as well, and echoing really the very same, that the peace of all is threatened by partisan interests. So there's partisan meaning like a third party. If somebody else is having a fight with somebody else, and then it upsets the peace of everyone around. That's the nature of things. So it's echoing really the very same email that came into me there from the World Family, saying that next Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, to make that a day of prayer. As the threat of war looms in Eastern Europe, the United States sought to put pressure on Russia on Wednesday by stepping up sanctions. It's one way of peacefully trying to bring about change. The US and the European Union, Britain, Australia, Canada and Japan plan to target banks and elites, while Germany froze a major gas pipeline project from Russia. There's a huge gas pipeline coming into Europe, I think, from Russia's gas fields there, and economically that would not be a good thing if that project were to be stalled, or it's one way of, with economic pressure, of applying pressure for peace. The British Foreign Secretary said that Britain would stop Russia from selling sovereign debt in London. The moves come after Russia deployed troops in separatist regions of eastern Ukraine. And I think the way that works is that there are some Ukrainian sort of separatists, meaning that they're on the side of Russia, but they're living in the Ukraine, and that makes things terribly complicated. The shelling has started. I saw some images there this morning, and it's not at all a happy situation by any means. It's a very burdensome situation. So it will be all over the news, and it'll be there for us all to trouble us and disturb us, as if we thought we were kind of coming through the pandemic and everything that was bringing with it in its trail. So much to pray for, and we do hope this is not the fulfillment of Our Lady's prophecy at Fatima, that Russia is spreading her errors throughout the world. Again, that can be interpreted in so many ways too, but please God it doesn't escalate into a huge international conflagration, because the power and the forces of military might nowadays are just too awful to contemplate, and the great destruction that can accompany that too. So it's certainly not a good day from that point of view. So let's pray and let's trust in God. God is the bearer of peace. Our Lady is the Queen of Peace. And here we have an instrument at our disposal with our prayer and our fasting and our good works to seek to bring peace and resolution to all in the way of conflict. Just turning to other areas of need too, Trócaire, our own charity, the one that is supported by the bishops of Ireland as well, and putting out an appeal, of course, too, as the Lenten season begins next Wednesday, for help for those parts of the world where they're suffering great food shortage. And in Somalia at the moment, there is quite a food crisis. So the Overseas Development Agency of the Catholic Church in Ireland, Trócaire, is urging international donors to intervene to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe in Somalia, facing its worst drought in 40 years. And there's a danger with, some of the other pressing things. Of course, they are important and they are pressing too, that we might lose sight again of the poor. And again how it is. Pope Francis, marvellous witness that he is, and seeking to just remind us by his presence and speaking out about these things all the while, that there are other great needs pressing in upon us too, and to be mindful of it. So the food crisis has been triggered by 3 consecutive failed rainfall seasons, and is expected to worsen as a result of a projected below-average rainy season between April and June of this year. And Trócaire reports that an estimated 4.6 million people will face emergency-level food insecurity in the East African nation between now and May. And this touches our hearts very much in Ireland. As you know, with our own famine not so long ago, I suppose 150, 170, I suppose, years ago now, and mindful of the great devastation that toll of that famine took place here in Ireland, with 1 million dying of starvation and 1 million emigrating, and great loss indeed to our country, and great deprivation at the time. So we know well, and our hearts go out to these particular situations too. And of course, with the drought, there will be a lack of clean drinking water, and that will expose many to contracting infectious diseases and all that accompanies that very sad situation. So naturally then there will be a displacement of families and migration to urban areas, and adding great burdens again locally and internationally in the same way, and that bringing about its own political instability and insecurity too. Because if the state can't cope and manage, there's likely to be uprising among the people. All these things are natural consequences of great deprivation. So Lord, between us and all harm, and certainly we pray and seek to do what we can to support these very, very difficult and burdensome situations. Very, very sad indeed. So Lent is approaching, and it's a time of prayer and of fasting and almsgiving. And what that does for us, it's a time of purification, a time of cleansing, a time of detaching ourselves from the things that get in the way between us and God. And so the gospel this morning was particularly challenging. If your hand should cause you to sin, cut it off. Very dramatic language. Rather go to heaven with one hand than go to hell with both hands and be guilty of sin. Or if your foot should cause you to sin or lead you astray, the very same admonition, cut it off. If your eye, pluck it out. And this is known in scriptural interpretation and exegesis, as they call that, breaking open the Word of God, as hyperbole or hyperbolic language. And a hyperbola in maths is, well, you know what a parabola is? It's kind of the shape of the back of the headlight on a car, that a parabola, a parabolic shape with the reflective surface, reflects out light in a certain direction. And a hyperbola is similar shape, but a little different. It's a different mathematical formula for a hyperbole. But a hyperbolic language then is this kind of, again, magnification idea or exaggeration idea of language. And it's a literary device, and obviously a rhetorical device too, because speakers and those who master debates and those who give presentations will employ different modes of speaking in different forms, at times of exaggeration for emphasis. And the emphasis here is very clear, that what the Lord is trying to emphasize for us is the great horror of sin. For all the great tragedy indeed of war, awful and brutal indeed as that is, for all the great tragedy indeed of famine too. The sin in its own turn is a terrible tragedy, and can be likened in some way to a war or a conflict between good and evil, a war between our desires to seek the good and do the good, but the tendency of our nature and the weakness of our nature to fall victim to temptation and to selfishness. So there's St. Paul speaks of that. There's a kind of war going on within us all the while. And again, material deprivation by way of a want of material goods teaches us likewise too that just as the body needs to be nourished with food and clothed and kept warm and plenty of water as well, so the soul in the same way. And if there are sources of poison or sources and channels which take us away from God, then the only response to that is a war on them and a destruction of them, a breaking of those channels, a breaking of those areas that lead us on a wrong path away from God. And it must be a radical one. There's no compromise. There's no negotiating with the devil. Isn't that the expression we use? There's no compromising with sin. You can't make peace, in a sense, with sin. This explains, this helps us understand why in the Old Testament there's so many instances where the Lord insists on the purging of enemies. Moses and the people coming from the wilderness, they were coming to take over the promised land, and they were instructed to purge these places of the enemies of God. And it seems very radical and very, very violent in some ways too, in order to completely destroy any influence that might, again, lead to their destruction or lead them away from God. And so it meant the complete deliverance of all that would be at risk. So a little bit like poison, I suppose. You know, if you have, again, drinking water that's not altogether good, there's some element of poison in it, then that must be extricated without leaving any of it there in order for it to be wholesome and to be healthy. And the same is true of the life of the soul. In order for the life of the soul to be healthy and wholesome, there's an ongoing need of purgation or deliverance, or cutting off again of the sources of evil and those things that draw us away from what is good and true and beautiful, what is authentic by way of virtue, cardinal and the four cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, and the three theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. These are the ways that we embody. Again, virtuous means uprightness or vir manliness, how we live according to the truth. So the virtues are well worth cultivating, but in order to cultivate virtues, then we must work at eliminating vices and viciousness. A vice clearly then is in opposition to a virtue. So the opposite of temperance would be indulgence. So if our way of life causes us to self-indulgence, we'll cut it off. Far better to be selfless and self-sacrificing than to be self-indulgent for selfish ends, you know. And you can go through the other virtues. Justice, what's the injustice, I suppose, is the opposite to that. If it is, again, the viciousness or the vice is rooted again in self-seeking. Because where there's injustice, it's the imposition of incorrect authority and the taking to oneself of an authority that doesn't belong to me. And I'm not giving the other person their due. I'm taking their due, so to speak. That's viciousness. And that's not a healthy thing at all for, again, at a practical level, for communion and community and for trust, let alone at the level of the spirit. So if I'm guilty of injustice and I'm seeing injustice at work in my life, or maybe in others, maybe I need to address that elsewhere. Again, a bit like the famine in Somalia and the war that seems to be beginning now between the Ukraine and Russia. These are great injustices because many innocent people will suffer. And so the only path to peace is back to justice, to cut off completely and eradicate absolutely anything in the way of injustice. Prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. Fortitude, I suppose maybe the opposite to that, or the viciousness or the vice opposite to fortitude, might be just cowardliness, or certainly want of courage to stand up for the truth, and letting things lie, letting things sit, not doing anything again that would be considered virtuous by way of upholding the truth and the good. Again, not doing my duty. Again, that would be a failing in courage. That if I have a duty and a task at hand and I'm not living up to that, again, it's hopefully quite obvious that's something we need to cut off. You know, if it should cause you to sin, cut it off, cut it out. Isn't that what mothers say when you know, children are fighting? Cut it out. You know, stop it. Enough, and completely, not just carry on at a lesser level or lesser degree. Cut it off. Cut it out. Prudence, then, I suppose the opposite to prudence would be, irrationality, I suppose. Or rashness, maybe. So prudence would demand a certain wisdom that would be informed by a healthy conscience and informed by eternal wisdom ultimately. And prudence suggests indeed that we see the person of Christ in one another, we see the dignity of the human person made in God's image and likeness, and that we make our decisions then based on the good of the other, and again the good of the community, and indeed to give blessings to God. So again, that's why these great evils of our day, we can see the task at hand, as always, to cut them out, to somehow address them. And wherever there is human nature, wherever two or three are gathered, there will no doubt be imprudence, injustice, cowardliness, and intemperance, or indulgence. The opposite, because our nature again is weak. Sin has broken and weakened our nature. The intellect is darkened, the will is weakened. So it's a constant task, really. It's kind of like going to the gym or getting that exercise that we know is good for us physically. This is spiritual exercise, which is far, far more important in so many ways. And yet there's so many useful parallels to be drawn for all of that. So we can advance to the theological virtues then of faith, hope, and charity, and see where faith nowadays seems to have waned so much that God has been cast aside altogether. And like the Pope is reminding us here, how can there be peace without God? There's lovely some messages came in there. I don't know if you've been following the Thursday afternoon show. It'll be on again this afternoon at 2 o'clock. It's on philosophy, faith and reason. There was a nice message sent in I was reading yesterday. The idea that, seeds can't grow in the soil any more than the human person can exist without God. It's very interesting. Fish can't swim in the sea, again, any more than, so if we cut ourselves off from God, then we are like fish taken out of the water, out of the natural environment. Birds in the sky, again, their natural environment is the air and the moving air. But you take them out of that and you put them underwater, again, they're out of their natural environment. And so if we are displaced from God, again, this want of faith, atheism seems to be the new popular, well, then we're out of our natural environment, our environment, and what do we end up? We see what happens as a result. If we're lifted out of our natural environment, we can't breathe, so to speak. We're not breathing in the things of God. Somebody has actually sent another little, these WhatsApp groups you belong to, you get these odd gems of wisdom coming through. There's a lovely thought, I'd never come across this before, that the idea of the tetragrammaton, Yahweh, YHWH, we put consonants in there, the A and the E, in order to pronounce it. But in Hebrew, YHWH, these are known as aspirated consonants. So if you could breathe kind of a YHWH kind of, and the idea, it's just lovely idea, never heard it before, was that those aspirated consonants in Hebrew are like breathing in and breathing out. YHWH, if there was a way of aspirating them. And that would be the more authentic Hebrew pronunciation and understanding of that tetragrammaton, as it's called, the 4 Hebrew letters that are the name of God, of Yahweh. And it's as if with every breath we're breathing out and every breath we're breathing in and out the name of God. It's a life breath. So if we take God away, then we remove God or try to distance ourselves from God, we're kind of strangulating ourselves, or we're not aspirating, we're not in the environment in which we're intended to be, which is in the presence of God. And is that not where we want to be for all eternity, is in His divine presence? So in the exercise of faith, as we're learning through the letter of St. James, we are living in God's presence. And without faith, we're separating ourselves from God, and that's a path ultimately to misery. Because again, we're outside of that environment that we're intended to be in, which is God's presence. And hope and charity, we can explore those in the same way. that without Christ and his resurrection from the dead, what hope is there for the future? Again, this is a supernatural virtue. And the vice or the viciousness there, associated with it, the opposite, would be despair and despondency. And, what's the point? What's the use? When this ends, it's all over. Flick of a switch, nothing else. And why begin in the first place if there is no hope? So hope is one of these infused virtues. It's what God gives us, and the power of Christ himself in his resurrection gives us hope. So even in the face of the deep sorrow and the lamentable situation of war, in the face of great hunger in the world today, it's as if the world is crying out for hope, crying out for deliverance from its woeful condition and state. And the only hope that can come to us, the only hope there is in the end, we cannot trust in human creatures ultimately for a resolution. Now, God entrusts us with the capacity to bring resolution, but it's by his grace. And it's in God we trust, in the divine mercy we trust. Charity then demands the exercise of faith and hope, and the bringing of that gift to others, the sharing of that gift with others. There's the task at hand. Of course, the opposite of charity, the vice associated with charity, again, is just simply greed, selfishness, gluttony, all those deadly sins that we're familiar with, that seeks not to love others as they ought to be loved. At the very least, the gospel we heard there, was it yesterday, to love others as you would have them love you. I mean, this is as I would have them love me. To love as I wish to be loved. At least that's a starting point of some form of charity. But the highest expression of charity is love of others for God's sake, for love of God. Even if it is that we don't feel it in our heart, even if it is that there is opposition or conflict, or we're receiving indifference, we're receiving a violent response, we're receiving an antagonistic response. So it is that's a pure expression of charity, when we can love without being loved in return, or without any expectations in return. And that demands grace, really, and can't be done without divine grace as well. So there's just those few little thoughts to share with you today. Please do interact with me here, perhaps indeed in the light of the news that's coming to us. Maybe if you'd like to offer some thoughts as well, and words of hope and encouragement and uplift too. And really our thoughts and prayers are with our dear friends, especially our sister radio stations in the Ukraine, in Kiev, and in Moscow as well, in Russia. Now, if I mentioned before, I think that I was on Radio Maria Russia during the World Meeting of Families. It was a lovely moment and just felt a little bit surreal. They gave me a call on Skype I was in the RDS at the time for the World Meeting of Families, and they had an English-speaking presenter there and were quizzing me about Ireland. They had limited enough knowledge about Ireland and the Irish people and so on. And part of the show, part of the programme, a listener rang in. So a Russian lady from, I have no idea where, the heart of Russia, was listening into Radio Maria Russia and was just asking me a few questions about life in Ireland and so on. And I just thought it was a lovely moment. Never thought in my wildest dreams that I'd be speaking to a Russian audience. And it was just nice because the World Meeting of Families was expressing our communion and faith together. So I have no doubt but that there's great and fervent prayers being lifted up in Radio Maria in Russia and in Radio Maria in the Ukraine. I wonder, gosh, would they be in communication with one another? I'm quite sure they would be, and maybe even praying together on air. Wouldn't that be a beautiful gesture of solidarity and of peace too, that sharing that deep faith that we have in our Lord and our Blessed Lady, and the power of peace that she brings to us by bringing us her Son. So let us just keep that in mind and in prayer, and we have an extra, more than an extra, so it's high incentive now on our journey through Lent particularly, and the power of prayer and fasting to bring about a resolution, to bring about the divine help that's needed to bring peace and to bring justice into our deeply troubled world indeed. So good to just converse about these things and share them a little, and bring the light of faith to bear upon them too. This is our purpose and our role here. And I very much appreciate indeed if you can text or email in and share your thoughts as well. As always, 089467200 is the text and WhatsApp number. You can email us, of course, info@radiomaria.ie. We always like to hear from you as well. And why not write to us at St. Anthony's Business Park, Ballymount Road, Dublin 22. So we do indeed like and enjoy to hear from you. If you want to drop a comment here as well, of course, on Facebook or YouTube, you'd be very welcome as well. So Breda Coleman now, Eamonn has kindly lined up a piece of music for us, and the title of the track is Hungry, as in Hungry, and a beautiful voice she has too. So back very soon after this music.
Broken, I run to you, for your arms are open wide. I am weary, but I know your touch restores my life, and so I wait for you. So I wait for you. I'm falling on my knees, offering all of me. Jesus, you're all this heart is living for. I'm falling on my knees, offering all of me. Jesus, you're all this heart is living for. And so I wait for you. So I to you, for I know you satisfy. I am empty, but I know your love does not run dry.
Welcome back to Radio Maria Ireland. Thanks for your company here. The familiar voice of Breda Coman. Hungry is the name of that title. Beautiful selection of music there. I'm not sure where Breda is these days and if she's composed any music more recently. But do indeed keep an ear out for beautiful uplifting music like that. We love to hear from you and share with us. We had a nice email in this morning actually, and I'll get to that lovely piece of music that was sent in to us, and a CD sent in to us yesterday as well of some promising music too. So we'll get to review that and have a listen through, and we have written up our music policy of course as well, and are working on raising the standard all the while with some beautiful music here for you, and inspiring and uplifting music too. So thanks indeed for your company. As I say, do let us know if you hear some music that touches your heart and you think that might well be appropriate and worth sharing here with our listeners. Do get in touch. We, again, love to hear from you. We were chatting there not some time ago about, short time ago, I was on with Roisin, I think, last weekend, about the idea of natural law and how that guides and informs us at the human level at least, as we gravitate and look towards the supernatural and the place that God has. Again, how the light of the gospel can build on. You know, this idea that grace can build on nature. And so at the level of nature, we can learn a great deal. And so again, the Faith and Reason, that show at 2:00 this afternoon, is seeking to do that, to explore the area of nature and the natural, and philosophy, whatever wisdom. We're listening to the book of Kohelet, is it, Ecclesiasticus, these mornings for the Office of Readings, and some of the natural wisdom that the writer is able to discern, but raising that up then to the supernatural in the light of the things of God. And you know the first line of that, you've maybe heard it before, "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "all is vanity." And it's kind of, would you say it's tongue-in-cheek, or would you say it's a little reflection on reality? Or maybe it's a bit melancholic in that it's like, oh, look, it's all kind of coming and going. Is there anything that lasts? Is there anything that's worthwhile? And I suppose the writer is of some advanced years, having reflected on, because that's what he says in the writings, or she. We actually don't know the author per se, but how they've kind of tested and tried what's on offer and sampled all kinds of different things. You know, I tried this, I tried that, and in the end I found, sigh. What was it worth in the end, investing all my time and energy into these things, into what the world has to offer, and I'm still left dissatisfied, still haven't found what I'm looking for. That the world can never altogether satisfy our needs. Maybe not so much never altogether, never ever, or never at all, ultimately. Only the things of God. And that if we can enjoy the things of the world, such as they are, in the light of faith, it puts a very different perspective on things. But natural law, at least it's a beginning. So for those who've maybe lost sight of things of faith or things of God, it's a very useful starting point to begin on the path towards a morality that makes sense, that fits in the heart and the mind and the spirit. Even if I don't believe in the spirit, there's something that's written on all our hearts, that we know the difference between good and evil. At the level of heart and conscience. Again, before you ever get to believing, say, in the soul or the immortality of the soul. And natural law is a rule and a measure of acts or actions, what we do, directing them to their proper end and promulgated by being in man's very nature. So that in our very nature, we know at just a basic level, a natural level, it's not good to steal. It's not good to take life. It's not good to lie. These things are innate. It's because we know that you can always go down the roads if you wish. We're free to steal, we're free to lie, we're free to take life. But we know naturally, again, without any outside interference, without any extraneous influence, that that does not build up a good community. That does not make for good relationships with one another. And we quickly realize, again, if we have any natural sense, any sort of love of wisdom at all, that we need and depend on one another for all kinds of things, by way of goods and services, if nothing else. And just simply, we're not meant to be alone. It's curious, interesting, isn't it? All these things are in sacred scripture. That's there in the book of Genesis. Man was not meant to be alone. It was not good for the man to be alone. We are meant for communion. We're meant for interaction with one another. And it doesn't make sense for us to just, what are these? You see these people who head off into the wilderness and they go off grid and they seek to be self-sufficient. And the funny part of all of that, when you see these videos floating around, is that here they are building log cabins, living off of the land, sort of in the raw of nature and the harshness of nature. But here they are sharing it on a camera, on a video, and glorifying in it, and that without an audience to see how well they're doing living off grid. Their achievement won't be appreciated. So it's a bit of a contradiction in terms, in a sense. You're living off grid, but here you are sharing it with the world on the internet and looking for some sort of acclaim in that. So at the level of nature, we can begin there. And that's a conversation I'm afraid we'll have to come back to on another day. But it makes for interesting meditation. So don't forget that Faith and Reason at 2 o'clock will build on that very conversation too. Thanks for your company out this morning. It's turned to 12 o'clock. Let's pause for our Angelus and our midday prayer.